A few years ago, I was visiting Berlin. I walked into a store and decided to speak German. The conversation started well. I understood the shop assistant, she understood me. Everything seemed fine. And then suddenly, she switched to English. I remember feeling embarrassed, almost offended, as if she had just announced to the entire store that your German isn't good enough. What made the situation worse was that I spent the entire day overthinking it. For hours, I kept analyzing that one conversation. But later, I realized something important. The problem wasn't my German. The problem was the story I was telling myself. Because while I was busy analyzing every mistake I had made, the shop assistant was probably just trying to help me. And that's exactly what happens to many English learners. We spend so much time worrying about our mistakes that we forget something important. Human beings are social creatures. We care what other people think of us, and that's completely normal. And when it comes to second language, we start analyzing even more. Our grammar, our vocabulary, our pronunciation, the meaning we are trying to communicate. Every sentence suddenly feels like a test, and that's where fear begins. Fear of being judged, fear of being misunderstood, fear of sounding less intelligent or unprofessional. And this fear becomes even stronger when English affects something important. Maybe you're speaking to your boss. Maybe you're in a job interview. Or maybe you're talking to a doctor. Maybe you're trying to make friends. Suddenly, the conversation feels bigger than English. You're no longer thinking, how do I say this? You're thinking, what if they think I'm not competent? What if they think I'm not educated? What if they think I don't belong here? And that's where many learners get stuck. Because they are no longer afraid of making a language mistake. They're afraid of what the mistake might mean. The strange thing is that language mistakes feel much more personal than other mistakes. If you make a mistake in math, you got the answer wrong. If you make a mistake in English, it often feels like you are wrong, as if a mistake says something about you as a person. That's why language mistakes can hurt so much more than they should. When I think back to that day in Berlin, I realized something. I spent hours worrying about what the shop assistant thought of me. Meanwhile, she probably forgot about the conversation 5 minutes later. She wasn't judging me. She wasn't laughing at my mistakes. She wasn't analyzing my pronunciation. She was simply trying to help. And that's true in most situations. People care far less about our mistakes than we think they do. Most native speakers are busy thinking about their own lives, their work, family, problems. They are not spending their day analyzing your grammar. As long as communication happens, that's usually enough. In fact, many people are impressed that you are speaking a second language at all, because they're imagining how difficult it would be if they had to do the same thing. The funny thing is that most people never remember our mistakes, but we remember them for years. I can still remember awkward conversations I had while learning languages. The other people involved probably don't remember them at all. That's how fear works. It convinces us that everyone is paying attention, when in reality, we are usually the only ones still thinking about it. Have you ever noticed that native speakers make mistakes all the time? They forget words, they start sentences and never finish them. They mispronounce things. They use incorrect grammar. And nobody panics, because communication is the goal, not perfection. But language learners often expect themselves to perform better than native speakers, which is completely unrealistic. So, what should you do? Speak anyway. Not because you will be perfect, but because that's how fear gets smaller. Every conversation teaches your brain something important. Nothing terrible happened. You survived. And the next conversation becomes a little easier. That's how confidence is built. Not before speaking, through speaking. Practice also does something else. It helps move vocabulary from passive knowledge into active use. You stop recognizing words and start using them. That's when real progress happens. So if you are afraid of making mistakes in English, remember this. Most people aren't judging you nearly as much as you think they are. They are simply trying to understand you. And every time you choose to speak despite the fear, you are becoming stronger. The goal isn't to speak perfect English. The goal is to communicate. And nobody becomes a confident speaker by waiting until they are ready. Confidence comes from speaking before you feel ready. Now, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever avoided speaking because you were afraid of making a mistake? Tell me your story in the comments. And in the next video, we are going to talk about one of the biggest lies in language learning. A lie that kept millions of learners stuck for years. Because what most people think fluency looks like is completely wrong. See you there.